which are for you to discuss things with me, but we're going to do some other stuff first. We're going to go to site. You need to have your texture pieces of paper with you because we're going to do some soil texturing, so you need to have your bits of paper which tell you about stoniness and soil texturing, particularly the soil texturing bit, of which there are two charts. There's one which is the flow chart and one which is the question, because you're going to do all those, and you just follow the questions and they're there. And the other thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you some augers. It augers well. So here we have a standard auger. If you actually look at buying augers, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types, and there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of head. So you can get a head for looking at clay, a head for looking at sand, a head for looking at silt, and a head for looking at gravels. And there are different types. So I use this type here, which is called a combination auger, because it does all different types of soils and sediments. Actually, this one's broken. And you essentially twist it into the ground and pull out a plug of soil and lay it out, twist it in the ground again and pull out another plug of soil. And then when it gets down to the bottom, you just add another rod to it and you go down again and again. So I've taken this one down 11 metres.
Wow.
And so this is a way of not taking samples, but seeing what's beneath your feet. If you want to take samples through soft sediments, you can use this, which is a gouge auger. It's like a cheese corer. And if you can push it into the soil, so into sediment, into soft silts, into peat, and turn it and pull it out, you can then record this and take samples out of this. Or you can cheat, as I do, and have one which is 1 metre long, which means you have to push it in less often. So they're just types of auger. It makes it more difficult to understand what's there because your vision, a bit of sediment you're going to look at, is only that wide. It's only this wide. So obviously you can tell whether it's blue and then turns green, or it's red and then turns yellow, or it's sandy and then turns silty. But any more detail in there, like the structure and the stoniness and the inclusions, you're hardly going to see in this. So it's like with all bits of kit, anyone can use a piece of kit, but really to use these properly and get a detailed interpretation, you have to have a geoarchaeologist on the end of it. But to answer archaeological questions like, is there a pit here, is there a ditch here, how deep is it, you need to have an archaeologist on the end of it. So with that in mind, we just take one with us, because I've got some questions to ask of the site. And some of the questions might be answered with this, or I might just be a pain in the arse and making you carry things. So this one's heaviest. Oh God. Carry that. Okay, so environmental archaeologists are armed with a whole tool of instruments and samples, and behind every instrument and every sample, of course, there are a series of questions and a series of specialists to answer them. Okay. So now we've wandered to site, and we'll have a look at the site. We're going to do two things. One, we're going to look at the flotation tanks. We've actually got some flotation tanks set up. Hopefully we can start the generator and we can actually run them, so you can actually see one working and see the flotation in process. You've seen it in theory in here. And then we're going to look at the site as a whole and discuss what is worth sampling, discuss a sampling strategy, and we're then going to look at some soils and sediments or some fields in situ possibly for ask them about. And the whole point of that is you're going to be involved in the sampling strategy. You're going to come up with ideas, and if you don't come up with ideas, I'm not going to say anything, and we'll go quiet and you won't learn anything. And then we'll see how it goes. We'll look at do some soil texturing on site, so you get an idea of that, and then we'll come back here, play with the microscopes. I've got a couple more PowerPoints which we don't have to see, but they're very short, very quick, and they reinforce the sampling strategy and see where you went wrong, where you were brilliant and got it all right, and it gives an example of something on a site plan, and we look at what we'd sample and why and how we distribute them. Okay? And then you can ask questions. And hopefully what it will have done today is given you a flavour of what environmental archaeology can do for you, because the whole point is you're in command of it, you need enough knowledge, and it's working for you. If a specialist is making you work, it's the wrong way around. Right. Cool. By one of the excavators on site. And the advantage of this one is it has less water, and therefore you need less water to start it off, less water to recycle, and you have these. But as you can see, they're just things you can buy in B&Q. They're simple submersible pumps. You can get them running off a generator, or you can get them with just plug into the electric and you can run off electric. So one I have outside my lab, this is electric, so it's nice and quiet, and runs off. So when you get your soil sample, you see our environmental archaeologist my sample first, put it in a fermentation tub of water, soak it so it's broken down, because sometimes the clay will stick together, create a small tank. To do that, you can stir it regularly, and you'll just get a porridge or a diarrhea sample, which you can then tip into the flotation. As you can see, it's obviously dried out, it's absolutely rock solid. Now the other thing here, okay, so the river's over there. Yeah. So why isn't it over there? Or why isn't it nearer the river? How do you know the river was there? How do you know the river was there? I'll bet you 100 quid it wasn't there.
It was probably closer.
I don't know where it was. It might be close to the site, it might be further away, I don't know. So why is the site here? Okay, for a couple of Roman roads. It's a crossroads, isn't it, of Roman roads? Or it's the bridging point of Roman roads. The Roman road then goes from here and across the river. So why have they come to this point across the river?
How big the crossroads?
It might be shallow it is, it might be slower to move in. Okay, so the river is wide up there and it's getting narrower as we're moving down there. So on the right line. Okay, so I've told you that in this floodplain, just down over there, there's 8 metres of alluvium. In the trees over there, there is 7 metres of alluvium. Up over here, there's at least 5 metres of alluvium, burying all the archaeology. So what's happened to your site?
The flood one is around.
Sorry?
Flood that's gone around.
So why is the flood gone around something? Because it's on a hill. So if there's all that much alluvium around here, this must have been on a hill. So in the Roman period, you can take off 2 or 3 metres of alluvium all the way across here, or all the way across here, and this would have been a rise. And therefore you'd put your settlement on here. That's the exact point where you take a jumping off point of the road across the river, which you're not taking over the river, you're taking to the river, so you can then go across the road. But it's a rise, it's an ideal point, you can see it anywhere and it's high and dry. If you go south of Lewes, there are 2 paths, upper rise and lower rise, and they are hills, huge hills sticking out of the valley. And this must have been one in the past, and today it's just flat, because today it's covered with alluvium. It's very. So you're excavating the top of it. You're excavating what you did, and then you stop finding any artifacts awaiting here, and you stop finding any geophysical awaiting here. Certainly there is a very square rectangular area, but why isn't there any extra mineral activity? It's all deep and buried, so why haven't you looked? Because archaeologists are fickle, and archaeologists just excavate the bits where there's stuff, where they can find stuff, but it's something difficult and technology. What you should do is order this whole area and work out how big that is, then perhaps dig a hole through the testing out of that hill and see where you can find it. And if you get down to the road there, it might be full of archaeology, it might be full of different stuff. there. But this is a rectilinear closed site specifically with stuff in it. But the stuff outside it might be different. And that's what you should be thinking about as an archaeologist. You should be thinking outside the box all the time. Because that is your window on the archaeology. Why is that the window on the archaeology? That's where Rob's decided to dig, because that's where he knows there's going to be stuff to find. He knows there'll be stuff to teach you about it. He knows there's going to be artefacts which you can date it. Therefore he knows the stuff that you can progress with. But now once you've done that, you put it into the landscape, the rest of it. Because it wasn't just a dot on the landscape, it's a part of the landscape. And as an archaeologist, it's our job to look at the rest of the landscape on the site. Why we put money on it. It's buried under that. All the most important significant stuff will be up here, live on the top, and that's why it's there. Live on the high land, on the dry land, on the area that's less studied than ever during the rainy season. Be careful it doesn't wash out, and you have to be there for the entire length of the time of the sample processing, because you can't just let it go and walk away. You then do have to collect the material, you then have to bag up the residue and bag up the material. So this is what your sample looks like, and we know this is 10 metres, so we can now put 10 metres in here. And if you notice, we've got a net, the mesh here is about 1 millimetre, but underneath it you'll notice that there's a grid, which is just to stop the mesh being taken straight down to the bottom. So most of them will have a grid of some kind, or wire mesh which holds the sample. We can then just tip the sample in, and as we do, you can actually manually try to break up some of those clods, which is why I soak it with water beforehand to do so. And as we do so, we will start seeing, goodness gracious me, what's that? Did you see charcoal in your sample when you were taking it? No. Well, yeah, you didn't look like it. It's being unfair. So look how much charcoal's in here.
Oh wow.
Okay, and I've only put a little bit in. This is the bit that's coming off easy. There's still clods of it to it, and look, we're already getting charcoal. There's little bits of twig in there, and so there you go. This is all the stuff that was in the soil, and you thought, oh, I might be bollocks about all this charcoal in the stuff that's never there. Look, this is just a pile of soil, which as the people pulled it out, looked like just a load of this tile. Who was Roman tile? Yeah, someone missed that, didn't they? So that's spoiled it.
It's not spoiled meat.
What?
It's not a
That's not
spoiled
spoiled
meat.
it. What is it then?
So the reason we are sampling this, I will tell you the sampling strategy,
Right.
because I have now asked and found out. This is the collapse of a feature that we had last year
Right, okay.
that had a lot of organic material preserved in it. This is where our 8 hobnail shoes come from, and because we are trying to find more of the organic material from the collapse of that,
Okay.
we thought this might be an interesting thing to sample.
Right, perfect. Okay. So that is.
Do you
And
know
the
what context it's from?
And the answer is, look, we're getting charcoal in here. We're having evidence of burnt material. So is this part of one question? What sort of questions can we ask at that then? Okay.
To make nails.
What?
Something will have to have made.
Yeah, but let's have a look. We can have a look at the wood. So what sort of bigger questions might you want to ask with charcoal? One, is it a furnace or a fire? What else might we want to? Yeah. Okay, is the wood local? Yeah. The other thing we might want to ask, is it a part of the structure? You said it was a structure that has collapsed. So has the structure been burnt out? So is this a part of the wood of a wattle and daub or wooden structure which has been burnt out? So we might be able to tell that, one, from the archaeology, and two, by looking at the species. If all the species are all the same, and they're all the type of things which are good for carpentry, good for structures, that might indicate that. If there's a whole range of different species and there's round wood and heartwood in there, then it would suggest it's not a structure, it's part of something that's burning. If it's all oak, then it's part of a kiln or a furnace. And that then gives us 3 potentially different activities, 3 potentially different things from this one sample. And so with this, you can't just turn your back on it and bugger off. You do actually have to help and twiddle it around. Okay. So if there are soil clumps in there, you can gently tease them apart. But if you just swish it around, you'll find that the silty bits will actually drop through the mesh and fill up this pattern. So yeah, you just press the bits of soil and don't push them. Right, and then we leave the rocks in there at the moment because they're part of the residue. It's quite cathartic, quite pleasant. It's ideal if it's slightly higher up so you don't know.
Oh, big bits of charcoal.
And you can just put these on yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Big bits of blue.
Anyone else want to go? Feel free.
Yeah.
But there, if we look in here, you start seeing there's charcoal. There's also modern twigs and things, which is important because that gives us indication of the integrity of the sample. So are these modern roots? How much modern intrusion have we got? How careful do we have to be about the value of some of this material? But also at the moment we can't see any charred fire remains. That doesn't mean there aren't any there because we need a microscope to do that. But so far we can't see any, which might mean it's all charcoal, which means it's all burnt wood, which means it's all part of the structure or part of the oven or kiln or furnace rather than processed as crops. Now whether that is consistent for this feature or for the whole site, it is possible this site has got activities we aren't processing crops and there you go.
No, thank you.
And so the best way of dealing with these is once you've got your sample in, you just keep it going, and ideally you can actually have two running at the same time. You can be processing this, and the most important thing with these is you should always have a label with it. The label should always be on here. As I used to say when I used to work for a company, I'd say label, label, label. On the basis if you drop down dead, I can move you aside because the sample is irreplaceable, but you're not. Perhaps that's a bit unfair, but the sample, if you think about the amount of time and effort that's gone into to get the sample to here, and the amount of time you've now spent getting that charcoal out, you have a label so you know what it is, that nothing is lost. Otherwise, if you processed all that and there's no label in it, it's like it's chucked away. Well, then the only thing it's useful for is teaching the material or identifying it for its own sake. It's no use to you as something. You don't know it comes from the process. So my mantra has always been label, label, label. I label everything, make sure it's all labelled. When I'm in a lab, I label everything. If I go off and get a cup of tea, I make sure all the sieves are labelled because I'm usually processing 3 or 4 samples at the same time. It's very easy to remember that. You go out and have a cup of tea, someone talks to you, you come back in, you've forgotten. So 2 seconds, label everything. It's worth having more labels than none. How's it going? How much mud is in the bottom there? Can I put some bit more in?
Yeah, kind of rocks at the bottom there.
That's it. Just pull it in. And so these buckets are quite useful because they're 10 litres. So we know that's 10 litres. And the value of knowing how much we're doing is because in some cases we might be comparing samples in terms of charred fire remains per litre, grades per litre, and that just helps us identify the density of activity or the density of material on site. This is where we might look at the numbers of sherds or number of coins in an area or a grid. So we're looking at, and that might give us an indication of the difference. So if you say this deposit was dense in charcoal, you can actually have a look at the charcoal and say, no, mate, there's hardly any in there. Or yes, you're dead right, you've got 10 times more charcoal. Nearly every deposit on a site like this will have some charcoal, because every fire that is burnt on site or near here will end up with charcoal. That charcoal will blow away, literally. The charcoal is indestructible, the only thing that happens is that it will get smaller, but the charcoal cannot be removed. It is carbon. Carbon is indestructible. You can only make it so small that it becomes unidentifiable, but it is still there. So that's why it's important to know what the context is and what you're sampling, because in the background there will be some crushing charcoal, so make sure you're looking at good samples. So if you have a ditch which got a fill which has got some charcoal in it, that is going to give you a generic question answer, not a specific one. Flush it down, but you might then get a hose or a bucket of water or a little pitcher of water and just tip it around. And what we will do is when you switch it off, everything will sink to the bottom. So the other thing we can do is switch it off and then drain a bit more water out into there so the water level's lower, and then flush that out into there. What we want to do is finish this sample so it's got nice and loose. So does anyone else want to come and give all their hands in and have a go? Oh dear, what do you mean it's dirty?
You need to put your hands.
Yeah.
It's very warm. Well done.
Yeah, just be glad you're not doing this in cold water and in the winter.
Yeah, no, I have done it. The first thing to do when I've done it before is get the hammer out and crack the ice off.
Yeah.
Or the worst one is when I was in London, we couldn't do this on site, so we did it in their offices.
You should have done it on me.
And we couldn't do it in the sink because it blocked it up. So we had to do it down the loo. And then every now and again, someone wanted to.
It stops in that bit.
Oh, right, okay. There's quite a few stones in there, so if we now swish it around a bit. And don't crush it too much because you'll crush the charcoal. But if you just put it between your fingers and it starts to fall apart, so you're doing a good job. And if you work for an archaeological unit, this is one of the jobs you might end up doing. And everyone says, oh, we give it to, we haven't got anything for this untrained person in this location. Information. This is a trained job. And the person who does this, they do it properly, we do it quickly, efficiently, and get more out.
Get in there. I mean, you missed it this morning, you might as well be good.
Take your watch off. I'll take care of it for you.
Where's the stuff which is smaller than this mesh that won't float? Yeah, it's at the bottom. And then in here, it's nearly just rocks. Okay, and that's the residue. So it's nearly clean, but there's still more charcoal coming off it. What's this? So where's that from? From over there. How did that get here?
Flooded?
How? Erosion? That's option one. How did it get here? Yeah, someone almost definitely brought it here from the downlands for building, for roadways, for whatever. So there you go. That's why knowing your geology is important. Whereas some of this other crud here, this is a stone. That's the type of stone we find in the alluvium, so it's still here. So knowing your geology, knowing what's local, knowing what's not, is important. Which is why I get told off when I first set up on an archaeological site, I don't go to the site. The first thing you'll see is me driving around the landscape and everyone thinks I'm lost. And then I'll get to the site, I'll walk around the site, see, oh yes, that's chalk hills up there, oh the river's over there, and yes, we're on a plateau or whatever, and then go to site to put it into context. Many people spend all their weeks on site, but all they've done is spent their heads down features, being brilliant excavators, but never looked at the landscape around them. And one of the classic things to do is look at the photographers, look at the archaeological record of photographs. Post hole 1, post hole 2, post hole 3, ditch 4, ditch 5, slot 6, slot 7, area A, area B, area C. It's really showing you the location of where you are. So the first thing you want to do when you give a lecture to the general public is show you where you are. They're the most difficult photographs to find in archaeological collections because often people don't bother about that because they're more interested in that. So remember, where you are is important. So you need to address that yourself. Okay, so here we go. This is now nearly all stone, and if I rub it between my hands, you can see there's very little mud coming off. So that is technically residue. If we dry it, it's going to be dry stones. But if we look carefully, it looks like there are bits of charcoal in it. Now these are bits of charcoal that have been a pain in the backside that haven't floated. They haven't floated. Possibly because they're too dense, possibly because some of this silt has gone into the pores in the charcoal and allowed it to sink. Or if there's iron-rich deposits, sometimes that will go into charcoal go into the crack in the cereal grains and stop them from floating. So a large proportion floats all the time, but some of the stuff might still be in here. So if I decide to analyse that, it might be worth looking through this. Now if I want to look at the charcoal, I want to identify it. So what charcoal can I identify? How much of the charcoal in there can I identify? Or can someone identify?
By measurement?
So how big has it got to be to identify it? A millimetre. Okay. Right.
That's tiny.
To identify a piece of charcoal, you need to split it into two planes. You can look at the cross planes and vertical planes. And you're looking at the zoan and phloem in there and looking at the patterns of those to work out what species it is. So every piece of charcoal you physically need to hold and manipulate and split it into those two. So the answer is 4 millimetres. Or perhaps if you're very dexterous and have a lot more time, you can do it with 2. The only other way to identify smaller pieces of charcoal is through SEM, scanning electron microscope, which means every single piece has to be splatter coated in gold and identified. And that becomes very expensive, but therefore identifying charcoal in smaller pieces than 4 millimetres is expensive because you're paying for someone's time. So of the charcoal in here, it's only the bigger pieces that are going to be identifiable, but if we assess it, we can look at the quantity of it, and the quantity in itself is important. Because then we can look at quantity of charcoal over site, variation in distribution in quantity over site, and then we can choose elements to identify some of it. And we assume that the bits bigger than 4 millimetres that we're getting are representative of the whole lot. That's an assumption. Has anyone tested it? It's not quite true, but we don't go into that because it's too complicated. Okay, so that's what you do for flotation. So, you just switch it off. Actually, your 10 litre bucket ends up with a couple of handfuls of gravel. There you go. With a piece of tile, a couple bits of gravel, and down here, the plot. Okay, and you can see in there's charcoal, there's these fragments here, this size is identifiable to species. There are bits and pieces in here, so what we would do with this is flush it out and get rid of the fine bit of mud, which has just sat there because it's there. We would flush out the last bits of charcoal and then we'd air dry this. You have to be careful when we air dry it. I've seen people air drying them on site with nice little labels attached to the sieves, sitting out here on tables in the sun. And then they found it. Oh, I thought we had more. Because they've just distributed charcoal on that side. So you do have to be careful, especially out in the field. In the lab, obviously it's easier because they go into sieves and go to drying up and so forth. So we do have to be careful about that. So when it's wet and it's like this, it's fine. But if it's just sitting here drying in the sun, you know, this wind could be incumbent all the way. So that's what the process is. Okay, so that's how long it took to do one sample. This sample it looks clay, it looks silty to you. In fact, you can see that it's indeed nearly all silt and not clay, because it's nearly all disappeared. Okay.
What do you do with the residue at the bottom?
The residue at the bottom here.
No, like
This
yeah,
here.
what's caught in there.
Okay, this is dried
Yeah,
and then sorted for artefacts,
yeah,
and then sieved into different fractions, and
Yeah.
then we'll sort those for charcoal. So I only need to sort the 4 millimetres of charcoal or 2 millimetres of charcoal, but I will sort it in case there are charred plant remains in it. But I only sort it if that is worth analysing.
right, okay.
So this is going to take a long time to sort. If I look at that and go, yes, we can analyse that, I'll sort this. If that's not worth analysing, I won't sort this, and we will probably throw it. Technically, sometimes we will keep it until the analyst has nearly finished, in case the analyst says, oh, actually, I want some more samples from this phase, or more samples from this context, or more samples from this feature, in which case we can go back. But then ultimately, this lot gets thrown away. All the residue sorted and unsorted gets thrown away, and what goes into the archive for posterity is the charcoal and the flot, whether it's been analysed or not. So even if you've assessed it and decided you're not going to analyse it, this is still part of the archaeological archive. So it goes in there, so someone else in the past could do it. Someone else could radiocarbon date it. Someone else might be to do isotopes or DNA or other clever stuff on it in the future, which you haven't had. Or other questions may appear as a result of your analysis, as a result of the analysis of the site. Other questions may subsequently appear that you don't have yet. And so they can come back and look at that. And after all, the charcoal doesn't take up much space. It's just air dried and put in little plastic bags and put it in the museum.
But how many pieces of charcoal would you actually send for analysis? Let's say from, if you know that it's been a structure that collapsed.
Okay,
And this
from
is your
here
sample,
I would
yes.
send for the charcoal,
Yeah.
for this sample, I would sieve it out,
Mm-hmm.
4mm, 2mm, and send them all the 4mm
Mm-hmm.
and all the 2mm. Then depending on the analyst,
Mm-hmm.
they might identify 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pieces,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how many are there and depending what the level of analysis is.
Mm-hmm.
And so if our question is, is this a structure, by the time they've identified 15 pieces and they're all the same, we've answered our question if it's all birch or something. If it's a fire, a domestic fire, it's likely to have a number of different species in it, because a domestic fire is likely to get woodlands from over there, and woodlands from over there, and bits and pieces. So we're going to have a number of different species, often dry wood, often coppice wood, from a range of things. And if it's a furnace or an oven, it might be wood which has a high temperature burning, so it might be oak, so it might be all specifically collected. So we look at the entire plot, so the 2mm and 4mm we looked at. For charcoal, we'd take any plant remains out because there might be cereal remains or peas or beans in it, and then the entire flock with those peas and beans would be looked at for charred plant remains. Then look at the whole lot and sort the whole lot and identify as much as they can. So we get a whole load of technical tables from all these specialists, which then sometimes are so big and unwieldy that we either publish them, or we put them so they're accessible, or we summarise them in some way. So in one place we had so much charcoal done, we identified it, instead of putting the numbers and the fragments and whether it's roundwood or hardwood or whatever, we just had a table of all the species and then just put a tick when that species occurred in that feature. Because that's a good way of giving you an indication. If you wanted to know more, you'd have to go into the archive, but that's a good way in the publication for presenting that information. So we had either one table like that, or 42 tables with all the data. And the tables are very expensive to publish, and people aren't going to spend time going through that. And if you do all the questions and ask how many people looked at the tables in the first place, you'll find quite a number of people look at the summary tables, and the people who looked at the detailed analysis tables are nearly always the sad people who do the analysis.
That's why it's leaking.
Do we know what sample number, what context number this one is?
Not offhand off this one.
Right, so this shows you all the questions you've asked. So we have the context, the sample number, how many bags or litres we've put in, and then we have how much pottery has come out of it, weight, number, how much CBM has come out of it, how much bone has been found, how much firecrack flint, how much iron, how much slag. And in some ways we'll find that although the pottery and the CBM, the majority of that has come in your fines trays, you would find that a quite high proportion of slag from the site has come out from here, from this stuff here, which you now think is the rubbish. And that was not why you've taken the sample. That's a byproduct of it, or it may be a part of your sampling strategy, and that's what you want. And then if we've taken enough samples, we can now go back and look at this and look at the quantity of slag over the site and look at its spatial distribution based on the samples, which were taken from paleoenvironmental analysis, but they're also sampling from the other paleoeconomic models. So we've got slag, iron, and so forth. So that is just another way of having a controlled recovery of your finds. So there's your samples filled in, showing you what the sample is, how it's excavated by trowel. It's a sunny day, lucky person. Whether there are special finds in it, and being a Roman site, of course, there'll be special finds all over the place because it's falling. Special finds are falling all over the place. The location plan here is this site plan, and that's where it is. It's in the edge of this feature. We know what the feature is. It's 38 north. On my one, I actually say what the feature is, like pit, post hole, well, kangaroo, death pit, whatever, and so forth. So we know. And that interpretation is useful because I want to know when I'm assessing it whether it's a post hole or a pit. Because how does a charcoal get into a post hole? There's a post in it. So if there's a post in it, it's either got to be burnt out, and if it's lots of different bits of charcoal and it isn't, it means it's got in before or after the post. In fact, we now know that it gets in during the post, because if you look at post holes on any site, or posts on any site, any wooden site with a structure with a post in the ground, where does it rot?
The bottom.
No.
The side.
Which side? The left side. Oh, no, which side? It's the ground. So at the bottom it is moist. Moist, moist, moist. At the top it's dry, dry, dry. At the ground level it's wet, dry, so it rots there. As they rot out in hollows, and therefore that's precisely where the material can get in. So when we re-excavated the samples of the Butser roundhouse, we found evidence of crisp packets which had fallen into that bit of the post hole and gone down, because some of the students there during the teaching days were eating crisps during that, and they've gone in there. So it is quite interesting, because now we know a mechanism for how material which represents the activity on site gets into the post hole. Okay, so that's one thing. And the charcoal from the fireplace might then get scattered across the floor and into the post. But therefore the material getting in there is very different to the material getting into a pit, which is almost definitely thrown in and discarded on purpose. So that is purposeful discard, deliberate discard, whereas the material in the post hole is either the post or a sample of what's in the area. So knowing whether it's a pit or a post hole or the type of context is critical. Or is it a buried soil? And if it's a buried soil, I want to know, is it on the buried soil, in which case it's a fireplace contemporary with the burial of that soil? Or is it in the buried soil, in which case it's been incorporated in the soil and maybe hundreds or thousands of years earlier than the surface which I'm then excavating? So all this contextual thing is there because you need to go, how did my charcoal, how did my snail, how did my cereal grain get there? So you need to think of it from, you know, that grass there out onto your site to charring onto your features. So the last bit is on your site, how did it get there? If you know how it gets there, then it will tell you something about the activity of your site. If you can't tell how it gets there and you don't know, then it's only going to tell you something generic, like there are cereal grains on site. Whoopee. Most sites have got cereal grains on them or something or other because people are eating. And some of the rubbish they're eating they're throwing away and putting it in. So that's you, the archaeologist, not the environmental archaeologist, all of us together as a team to work out how did it get there. And that helps us understand activity, because it's not about charred grain. Okay? Right. We're now going to do two things. One, we're going to stand up and go onto the spoil heap, up that little ramp there, and look onto site. And we're going to have a look at the site as a whole, and we're going to stand back from the site and have a look and tell me what the features are, and we're going to discuss sampling strategy for the site. So you can imagine it, you've got the plan sitting in front of you, that's the site, and you're putting dots on it where you want people to take samples. Okay, you don't have all the information because you don't know which features pre and post date each other, you don't know what the phases are, but we have to look at that and have a general idea of where we go. Lots of layers. So we want to come up with a strategy that is representative of the site, but is also going to sample key deposits and key features rather than sample every Does stuff go down below that? Probably. So why don't you go dig down further?
Yes, whatever you want, he says.
Okay, so why have we stopped there?
Because we've
Does the-
finding things.
Starting to go. No.
We've stopped there because that's where the archaeological features are starting. So that's where we can see the archaeological features. So we can start to see the archaeological features, so we stopped. In other words, that's where the Roman period starts. So why have we stopped there?
So that we can study that in detail and then go down further. once
Right,
we study
so we can study that in detail, and hopefully we could then consider going down further. But the research design is to study the Roman period, so we've stopped there. But we perhaps should see what is below that, see whether there is a gravel island there, see whether there is more alluvium there. How can we do that?
Take us up.
Yeah, there's a much simpler way. There's a much simpler way. No, a much simpler way than that. Someone's already done it for you. Why don't you just look in the sections of some of the archaeological features? They've already gone down 2 metres. You can have a look at that, and that gives you an indication. And if you look at your Roman pit, on the side of your Roman pit, you can see what's there. Why have they stopped with the Roman pits? Why has the Roman pit stopped? Is it because it's so deep they don't want to dig anymore? Or have they got to the back? Have they got to the bottom and have they gone to Solomon Island? I don't know. These are all questions I will be asking when you're next on site digging in. They're things that you can think about when you're looking at your sections. Look at the side, because it's not just the sections of your Roman bit, but it's the side of the feature through which that's done. Because if this isn't natural, right, it isn't the geology, that itself may be archaeology. We've only stopped here because this research project is to look at the Roman period. If I was here, I'd bulldoze all this bit off and look at the bit underneath it. But that's what, just different archaeologies, different research. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down the plank and walk up to this section here. We're going to have a look at this soil section. Okay. Now the best sections to look at are, from a geoarchaeological point of view, is weathered sections. Sections that are cut flat and smooth. All the features are smoothed off and eroded. So let's start off with the basics. What's this?
Topsoil.
What's this? Correct. Did anyone know the nomenclature of soils? Soils are as simple as ABC. Topsoil is the main part and engine of the soil is, and the parent material is correct. Okay, so there's the A horizon, there's your B horizon, and this soil is developing on this, which is the parent material, which is, so what is this stuff? The soil is developing in what? What is the stuff it's developing? What is the stuff you're sitting on? I can tell you what its component parts are. I can tell you it's almost stone free, and I can tell you it's silty clay or a silty loam or a sandy silt. But what is it? What? Now you see, what that is what you want to know as an archaeologist. What is this stuff? What do you think it is? It's just arrived, and archaeology appeared on top of it. What did I say about the archaeology over there? What did I say about the stuff over there? Alluvium. So what's the stuff you're standing on? How do you know? Yeah, thank you. Okay, because I said it, right? Because I said it's alluvium. Right, how do you know I'm not talking a load of cobblers?
Because you're a doctor.
So that doesn't stop anybody, does it? What
You sample it and you test it to find out.
Right, you need to say, right, how do I know this is alluvium? How do I know Mike isn't talking cobblers? So we now need to say, right, what are the characteristics of alluvium going to be? Now this is not channel alluvium, it's overbank floodplain alluvium, which means the river floods seasonally, the water comes out and floods into the floodplain. So near the river, it'll be material and further around it drops water. Okay? That material is this area we got just a thin layer of water across it, perhaps an inch or two deep, and then it will sink in, and underneath it will be a micromillimetre of mud. Now that mud is all mud that was entrained in the water, so it wasn't dissolved, entrained in the water. And if we looked at the particle size of the mud, and looked at the particle size next to the river, the particle size here, and the particle size over there, how should they differ? Right, so if you look at a floodplain, should it always be level? No. Where is it going to be higher?
The edges.
Near the river. Why?
Because that's where it's come from.
Because that's where all the sands come from. All the sand goes out there, the silt in, and the clay down over there. So floodplains aren't level, they're actually sloping away from the river. So we could look at that and just test it by surveying it and then looking at the particle size. Or we could have a look at it in section, have a look and see whether there's any laminations and evidence of gradual deposition. And that's better not with an auger, but by digging a whacking wet hole. And what I do on archaeological sites generally is when they finish the machine, or sometimes before they finish the machine, I dig a whacking wet hole over there and look at the sequence. And I found other archaeological sites underneath the archaeology work. And then we decide is that important, has it to the research or development phase. So this is probably a new deal because we have an accumulation of material, but all of this is the soil. The engine of the soil is not the topsoil, but it's this bit here. And this bit here, can you just see these cracks here?
Yep.
There, in fact that's the size of that one. That's in fact the size of that one there. There's little cracks coming up here and down there, and a little coming up here and down there, and that's the shape of them. So that shape is long and thin, which means it's an ancient, well-developed soil which has been sitting here for ages. It has probably been ploughed, it's been disrupted, but we have evidence of long-term soil development, and that's floodplain soil development over a long period of time. But once upon a time, this was the topsoil, this is the topsoil, this is the topsoil, so it's slowly retreating. But as we're doing that, the soil is weathering down into the alluvium. So, one of the things we can do is look at the alluvium, and if we look at the side of the feature, which you've got your feet dangling in, does it look any different in terms of the size of the features with what we've got up here? In general? Otherwise, why is it here? And why have I got 3 metres of alluvium here, and why have I got Roman stuff in here? So one of the questions could be that we have 3 metres of alluvium under this, and 3 metres of alluvium under that, and the Roman site is sitting in here next to the river, whether the river was near here or later. Or this could be sitting on a hill which is not very far alluvium, and therefore we need to know what the date of that alluvium is, and there's more alluvium under there. The only way to do that is by doing a whole auger survey and test pit survey, and that's what should be done to put this site into context. And that's geoarchaeology in action. So, let's just see what the particle size of this is. So, you can all come up against this section. Right. Okay. You can have some of this, which is from that feature there. You can have some of this, which is from that feature down there. And you can have some of that. You can have some of that. And you lot can get the stuff from over there. And now, sample here. One from here and one from over there. This is from below your Roman levels, and that's from above your Roman levels. So now you're going to have a look at their different colours, mainly because the top one is part of the soil that's got organic matter in it, and the bottom one is not in the soil and organic matter has been lost. Though the bottom one was once a soil. Now, you've all brought your little sheets which tells you how to do your particle size, haven't you? So, you can wet your soil. You can do that either by dipping it in the water, or what the clerical way of doing it on site is obviously to gob on it. And then you can manipulate it in your hands. These are very dry, so they might need a bit of water, so you may need some from out of there. Okay. And now try, once it's wet enough, making it into a ball.
Maybe because of
So
the
is it needs to be
water.
this way or that way?
That's perfect in terms of moisture. Now read your thing, what does it say? Read out the first one.
Can the soil be rolled into a ball?
Yes.
Yes.
So if it's yes, go to number 3.
Does the ball collapse?
When lightly pressed.
So put it between your finger and thumb, and does it collapse?
Yes.
Right. Okay, then go to the answer on that one and move on.
Loamy sand.
Right, it says loamy sand.
Yeah.
Right, is there any sand in here? Can you feel any
I
sand?
can feel it, and mine's crushed up a little bit.
I can't feel any sand.
It feels like rain.
Okay, so if you do put it in your mouth, you can feel between your teeth a little grittiness. So there is sand in there, and it is fine sand. Why is it likely to be fine sand?
You can't see the grain.
Yeah, that's
Does that come from the river? From the river?
because it's alluvial. If it's alluvial, it means it's been transported by water. It's not the blooming ocean. It's not like the stuff on the beach which is coarse and gets down your socks and whatever. This is fine sand. It's so fine that you can only just feel it with your fingers. I can only just feel it, but I would say personally that is silty, and I'd say that's a silty loam. But now I put it in my mouth, I can feel the sand in it, so it's a silty sand or a sandy loam. Okay?
Loamy sand.
So there is a bit of
What's the difference between loamy sand and sandy loam?
the loamy sand is a sand with a bit of other things mixed in it, and the other one is, what's the other one?
Sandy loam.
The other one is a, okay, so this is a sand which has got silt and clay in it, and that one's a silt and clay which has got a bit of sand, a bit more sand in it. Okay.
Oh, so
And actually, what I should have done, what it's done is it worked out. We have a triangle. We have sand up here, silt down here, and clay down here. And if you work out the proportions of it, you can work out what the proportion of sand, silt, and clay is, and put a dot on this triangular map. And where that falls on that dot, where it falls on that triangular map, defines whether it's silt down here, clay down here, loam in the middle, silty, so forth. So it's the proportions of silt, clay, and sand. So the more sand it is, the sandier it is, and it becomes sandy loam. As you go up, it becomes a silty loam. And if you go in this direction, you become a silty clay. Yeah. And that's
See the doctor. How are you doing, Doc? It's good to see you. It's about 3 years or something, isn't it? 4 years? Yeah, good to see you. Mate, catch you later, eh? I'm just going to go and set out the holes for the geophys.
okay. We processed all the samples in there. We haven't done
Fantastic. That's us.
that one. Works fine.
Right, lovely.
This is the man who designed this and made those.
See you later, mate.
See ya, cheers. Okay, so has everyone got the same texture? Because some of you had that stuff over there, and some of you had this stuff over here. So what do you? So all the people who I gave stuff to, what's that? Or, if the energy hasn't changed and the river is coming out at the same flood level all the time, what's happened? It now was silty and it's now sandy. Which one? If it was silty and it's now sandy, which one's closer? So the top one is closer. So what's happened to the river since the Roman period?
yeah, because the hills
Fantastic. So there you go. So we've already done such wonders. That we know the river's moved. Of course it's moved because it's always moving. You only have to look at historical maps and it's not there. But it looks like between that deposit, which is a pre-Roman deposit, now it's looking like being right next to the site, but it wasn't right next to it. Right next to it, but it was just leaving. And if we did more analysis, we could work out. But you just did that just by looking at soil textures. And that is one of the characteristics. So you don't just say it's a silty clay loam or something. You have to follow these procedures so that it's consistent. But on the whole, it won't be 100% accurate, but you'll be pretty good. Then you can go and take this into the lab and measure it. So I go in the field with Richard McPhail and he does all this particle size stuff. And we did some work over 2 weeks, and then I went and spent 8 weeks in the lab checking the particle size. It was a waste of time, because although we got numerical numbers and everything, his texture in the field was 100% correct. What it did mean that I could now tell how clayey the clay was, and how silty the silty was, and how sandy the sand was, and to actually work out what the actual percentages were, and we could see gradual changes or sharp changes. So we got the nuance from it, but his texture in the field was absolutely spot on. And I've done. What characteristics have we got? Particle size, you've done that. What other texture? What other feature have you got in there? What's the most obvious thing? Okay, there's the cracks, which is what the cracks represent?
Pedals.
Peds.
Heads.
Which is what? Soil.
Foundation.
Soil structure. Okay. So colour and texture is what you play around with all your contexts. They're all interesting and useful, but the soil structure is the most important thing, because I can tell you that's a soil that's got structure in it. The stuff under it has no structure in it, so that's alluvium. And if I go down there and find underneath it a layer with lots of structure in it, and then I'm going to bury it. Now, a quick question for you: how does the soil get buried? Right, more soil goes on top of it, or more sediment goes on top of it. Fine, okay. Yeah, so let's just say we have stuff here. If there's a very, very thin layer of alluvium over here, so one flood, what happens to that? Does that bury the soil?
Leaves it, wouldn't it?
Why doesn't it bury the soil? You're shaking your head.
Only a very thin layer.
If it's a thin layer, what happens? The grass grows through it. So if you go into your lawn and you put a thin layer of sand all over it, it's going to make no difference, because next thing you know, all the grass is going to pop through it, and next year you won't be able to see the sand anymore. So how do you bury your soil? Okay, so I'll put a bit of sand on there this year, and the grass will grow through it. So I'll put a bit of sand on there next year, and the grass will go through it. So my soil will get sandier, but I haven't buried it, because it's just become part of the soil. So
Get rid of the vegetation.
Just one big event then.
it's time. It's the quantity and speed. So if we have a large event and a large deposit which the soil can't grow through, we're going to bury it. So if we have a buried soil, it's then telling us something very important about the material above it. And where do we normally find buried soils on archaeological sites?
Overflooded.
Under?
Overflooded.
No. And where are we going to find it? If we find an archaeological site, we're going to dig a hole. Where are we going to find the buried soil?
Pits.
No, because there's no soil in the pit. If you dig a pit, you can get soil in it? No.
Ditches.
No, you're not. Oh, you will get soil in the ditch, possibly, if it develops in the upper part. Where's the more obvious place? What happens when you're digging your ditch?
Near the river.
What happens when you dig your ditch? Okay, so what happens when you dig your ditch? You make a bank, don't you? What have you just done? And therefore, the places we quite often find buried soils on archaeological sites is under banks, under barrows, under long mounds, under monuments, and they've predated. Why? Because it's a single event of a large quantity of material. And it's not an alluvium gradually building up over time, or a colluvium, hill wash, gradually rhythmically building up. So it's telling us something about the event. Now we know obviously the archaeological event of building a bank or a ditch or a barrow is quick. But if the alluvium got a buried soil in it, then we know the alluviation had a phase where we've had rapid alluviation and large material dumps. So that shows us about proximity to the river, change in the system, changing climate, changing that. And all we've done is looked at the soil. We haven't been to the lab, we haven't done the analysis, we haven't even taken any samples. That's something you can do. And just how much would that change this if we dug a hole through there, found a buried soil? That's where all these Roman vertebrae and stuff like that. Like where all the organic stuff is. Okay? How do we prove how deep the alluvium is here? Okay, off you go.
Well, thanks.
No, off you go. Who's got the auger?
No one at the minute.
Oh. Push and twist, okay? So just put your weight on it and twist and get the whole thing down. And the only thing you have to worry about with the auger is it's almost impossible to break the auger, although that would be fact. Is that the only thing you can do is if you aren't careful, you can break one other element that we'd rather not do, and that's the person. When he's eventually put enough muscle into it and got it into the ground.
Don't have muscle.
And got it into the ground, you have to, that's it, push down and it's going, is that when you pull it out, you don't bend over and bend it back as you pull it out. Thank you, perfect. You bend your knees and do that. There are two reasons for that. One, then your back is straight and you don't do it. Two, what are the strongest muscles in your body? Your thighs, and therefore using the strongest muscles in your body. Goodness gracious me. Lay it down here, popping it out, there we go, we put a bit horizontally there so we know where we started. So you've got 8 metres to go, I think. Off you go. There is a technique to it, and it is technique, not just strength. This young gentleman is showing me then.
How do you do that?
No, keep going. You want to be halfway between there and the collar. So essentially there's a head, 2 dibs between the collar, 2 dibs between the nipple, which is a little... What's that bit doing? Oh.
I'll try.
What type of force of water is it going to take to move gravel? Yeah, but what type, you know, if this river is only coming out with tiny little sand, what type of river is going to carry gravel? Mark, river. Okay, so you're on the right lines.
Cold weather, ice.
No? So what happens at the end of the ice age?
Okay.
It melts.
Fine.
And large melt with the water, yeah.
So ice melts, vast quantities of water comes out, gravel gets flushed down here, so the bottom of here will be gravel belonging to the last glaciation, which is what date? Yeah, 1200, 8,300 BC. Okay, fine, good. Push it out. Okay, so great. So we are now down about 1 metre or so. That's how relatively easy it is to do it. And you can record this and you can see that that's alluvium and silty material right way through. And if you continue to hit, the only problem is if you do hit a stone, you can't do it, you're going through it. And sometimes if you're down 3 or 4 metres and you hit a stone, you've only got one other option. To do another one next to it, to find out whether it was a stone or a lot of stones. If it's a lot of stones, you can hear it because you've heard that, and then we'll hit the basal gravels. So what would be ideal, we do stuff from here right the way out, look at the basal gravels and map this whole landscape. And that would be a fantastic thing for this project and would provide chapter 1 of the monograph. To context, what you'd have to do is get here, auger it, record the deposits. Volunteers? Yeah, good dissertation project. Okay, so that's what we talked about, putting the landscape in, the idea of it being on a hill and everything else being buried is obvious. You all went with it because it was a good idea. A very good idea. But in fact now we've gone below it and found that if it was on a hill, we'd have to be on a hill of gravel or a hill of something that existed here. And if it's alluvium, it's just going to be level alluvium, because you can't get alluvium that makes a lump, because if you flood it, it's all going to create a level area. You're not going to get a lump of stuff. So which means you have just proven this isn't on an island or a hill, but this is sitting on and in alluvium. So there must have been a stasis period when flooding was decreased, where there was less flooding, where it perhaps was on a slight rise, where it's been demarked by the dishes which have prevented it from flooding. It may have been a slightly higher because the land is natural, but therefore it's not a hill, it's an area, and it has been made into a dry area by demarking it with the dishes and banks, which has prevented it from flooding. Because we know that we have flood deposits above it and flood deposits below it. And I can tell you that they go down several metres. And they go down several metres over there. And therefore this location has been chosen because of its locale and not because of any topographical quirk. There you go. So that gives you some information about the Roman stuff. But really, to test that properly, you do need to auger a lot more rather than just 2 holes. Well, I've done 3. So you do need to do it so that you can draw a section right across here. And somewhere we might find peat. And then you might be able to radiocarbon date it to work out whether peat is of Bronze Age or Iron Age or Neolithic. We know that some of the peats in here are Bronze Age, some of them are Neolithic, and there's a lower peat which is Mesolithic. And therefore we might then decide that, oh, actually this Roman stuff isn't worth looking at. Let's look at some of the Bronze Age stuff, because it might be waterlogged. It might have waterlogged timbers in it. It might have preserved leather in it. It might have
Got a real vendetta against the Romans.
it might have it might have pots with spoons in it, because that's what Must Farm had in it. Baked pots, ceramic pots with spoons still in them, with the gruel or porridge still in them. And that could honestly exist in this landscape. But it's not part of the research project. It's also very difficult to get hold of to get there, because it's a long way down. And also, the only thing that would be damaging it would be
Busting
the archaeologists.
Archaeology.
Okay, but there you go. So that would put it into context, and that would do that. Right. Okay, we're now going to go back to the bottom. We can have a swig of water. All right, we're then going to do a PowerPoint where you're going to do the sampling strategies, because I've got the site set up with lots of periods, lots of phases, lots of different things, and we can discuss that. And then you can ask questions, we can discuss anything you want. But I hope the whole point of today is to open your eyes, to do 2 things. One, open your eyes, and the other one is to make you think. And then there, and then we put it in the bag or record it on the content sheet. Right. How did it get there? And if you can work that out, then you can work out what its value is, and you can work out whether you need to sample it.